So I just wanted to give you a brief introduction and let you know that we are in Louisville, Kentucky. We're the only manned elevator in the state of Kentucky and probably one of the few in the country. We're at a crossroads now because there are quite a few people, all of them are on the board, who really have concerns about where we're going with this elevator, whether we're 100 years old in 4 years, whether or not there are legitimate concerns for safety and liability. And for that reason, uh, we have a good percentage of folks that have been speaking about automating. We had a letter put out by the board raising concerns. And so the few of us, I guess we can call ourselves preservationists, that have been trying to hold down the fort and keep our manned elevator really realized we didn't know what we were keeping. So we were looking for somebody who could inform us what keeping this elevator would imply if we kept it for 5 to 15, 20 more years, if not longer. So we found you. And so I was wondering if you could, just for the recording, introduce yourself, where you get your knowledge and where you get your position. And then I'd like to talk to you about 3 or 4 questions specifically.
Sure. My name is Stephen Comley. My father actually owns Embry Elevators, which is one of the oldest elevator companies in the country. It started in 1873. He still owns it. He's 93. He actually was a chairman of the board for elevator rules and regulations in Massachusetts. But I've worked in the trade my whole life. I have 43 years in the business. I started as an 8-year-old working on elevators when I was a kid with my dad for Payne Elevator. He's got 73 years in the trade. He's 93. He's still very with it. And I worked at the Portsmouth Navy Yard for 28 years. I took care of all the elevators up there. And so I have a very good resource as far as from the brand new equipment to the oldest running elevators out there. We had an elevator at the Portsmouth Navy Yard that was installed in 1899. It still runs without a problem. It's one of the most dependable elevators that we have there. They never put a penny into it, and yet it runs every single day.
We did have one person get hurt recently, and that provoked a letter from the board. And they were actually listing the reasons in the letter. And I'm wondering if I could read the letter to you. It's brief.
Did they trip?
Yeah.
I was going to say the only danger with those type of elevators is a tripping hazard because the elevators are stopped by the person on the elevator, and sometimes when the car levels into the floor, that's why a person that the attendant who runs the elevator really has to be pretty knowledgeable, has to be pretty experienced with the elevator because different loads will stop in different places. When you come up to the floor, they got to know how to slow it down and stop perfectly level. You don't want to be re-leveling up and down to the floor, but you also, it's something that when somebody knows how to operate the elevator, that it shouldn't be that much of an issue.
It says that these are the quotes. This is the quote from what is concerning people and what provoked our getting in touch with you. These elevators have served us well for almost 100 years. With proactive maintenance, it's possible that they continue to do so for additional years to come. Elevator outages over the past 5 years have required days or weeks to repair, but restoration of elevator service has always been possible. That's what we read. We are, however, seeing some issues that are not fully repairable and that we are just living with, such as inconsistent leveling of the passenger elevator. And the cost of reactive repairs will continue to increase due to obsolescence and unavailability of parts except by fabrication.
My opinion on that is it depends on what you're talking. Yes, you have to have maintenance on all these cars, but these old drum machines that have run for 100 years, they'll run for another 100 years. The problem is that the real problem is, like my father's machine shop years ago, they don't necessarily nobody wants to repair anything anymore. They don't want to come out and do like small repairs like these old machines in the years in the past. They'd take these drum machines, if they had a little bearing gone, they would repair the bearing. They would keep the machine there because the machines are absolutely bulletproof. You can't buy a better machine than what you guys own. There's nothing out there that's going to run 100 years. Nothing. So everything out there, like I said, I've worked everything from the older stuff to the brand new equipment. I'm an inspector in Boston right now. I'm no longer an elevator mechanic. I gave that up. I work as an inspector in Boston. Now I get to see even more stuff that's out there. And the newer the stuff out there you talk about problematic. I mean, up at the Portsmouth Navy Yard, they used to take some of your nice old cars out, and they'd be putting these new hydraulics in. They put these new high-tech boards in, and the control boards are just like they're no different than some of these are like computers. They're no different than your phones. Whereas in 5 years, I had some of the elevators up there, and they have all printed circuit boards on them. The old stuff like yours that has the relay logic and all the old carbon contacts and everything like that, you can still get all those parts everywhere. There's manufacturers, there's C's catalog, there's Adams catalogs, there's all kinds of catalogs out there
We've
that
got an
sell.
Otis. So we've got the old Otis.
Yeah, yeah, but I'm just saying that there's manufacturers out there that sell those parts, all your contactors, all your coils, all those relays and stuff. All that stuff is available. I wouldn't let anybody
Does
tell you that they aren't, because
and
even
our current elevator contractor is Murphy Elevator,
Mhm.
and I, so the question of unavailability of parts, that is not true.
No,
We
it's not
always,
true.
it's not
It's
true.
not. No, you have an old relay logic panel. It's so simple and yet so bulletproof. They don't break. They really don't. You have carbons and you have contacts. And I used to have those machines at the Navy Yard, and I used to have some spare carbons, spare contacts, spare transformers, all these basic little parts that you can still get to this day. Every one of them. Don't let me tell you you can't. You can. You can get all
Oh,
those parts. And and,
okay.
and what the and what happens,
When
go
we
ahead.
hear that we can't get the parts, it has to be fabricated. Is that fabrication also what you're saying? It can always be fabricated. If the part doesn't exist, we can have the part fabricated. And is that ungodly expensive?
Well, most of the parts that you're talking about are like the things that actually wear down, and those are the things on your relay boards, that the carbons and contacts they pull in and out all the time, and they wear down. So those are small little carbons and they're coppers that make up contacts on there, and the coils themselves. All those things are replaceable, and they are all out there. C's catalog, which is an elevator catalog, Adams catalog. There's a lot of manufacturers out there that sell old parts, and they do. They're brand new. They manufacture these old parts because there's hundreds and hundreds of old elevators out there running like yours out there. But the stuff doesn't, it doesn't break down. It's so dependable. And the elevator manufacturers are pushing all the new products, and the elevator companies are pushing all these new products. They don't want you to have this old stuff that's
Yeah,
dependable, that's reliable. That you know what I mean.
I
They don't want that, so they don't teach it. They don't want you to do that.
get it.
They really want you to give. It's like I said, one of the reasons, like I said, these new elevators go up there, and the guy says to me, I had a problem with the printed circuit board. I go in there and I said, what's the matter? Like, I don't know. There's something wrong with this board. And it's a printed circuit board that just look at. I'm like, there's inputs and outputs, but it doesn't tell you the logic and the information within that board. So I go in there and say, I don't know, there's something wrong with that board. So we take it out, we send it out. We got to buy a brand new board for $1,500, $1,800, and the car's down for 2 days, sometimes a week, because you can't get the board on time. Whereas my old elevators like that, your car would never be down for something like that. You have a problem with the carbon contact, you go over there, you change the carbon, you change the contact, you change the coil. Everything was very simplistic, very
Yeah.
simple, easy to repair, easy to change. You have steel rails, you have a big rugged elevator cab in there. The biggest problem I feel like you ever have is what you just said. You may have a new operator who's not very good at it. The most important thing you can have, the only problem you would ever have on that elevator, I feel, is tripping hazard, because the car didn't stop perfectly level the floor because the person who ran it up stopped it a little high, a little low, and somebody could trip on it.
So in the letter, it said that the cab is not leveling as it should. So you're saying, Steve, that that's a operator issue and not a representation of a diminishing capacity in an old manual elevator.
None whatsoever. There's
Mm.
that elevator that you have
Sure.
stops on your newer elevators. What they do is the motor dials into the floor and they roll into the floor and it stops perfectly with the motor, and then the brake collapses to hold the elevator there at the floor. The old elevators, like yours, they run to the floor, they go from high speed, they go into leveling speed, and then when the operator puts the handle straight up so it stops, your elevator actually stops on the brake. So the brake actually has brake pads that collapse on it and it goes "Brrr," and it stops. So if you have a heavier load going up, it could stop sooner. If you have a lighter load, it could go beyond the floor. So this is where you have
Wow.
an operator who is experienced. If he has one person on the car with himself, he could come up. He
Yeah.
knows the car level at a certain speed. He knows when he could stop it, and it's a person that's been very familiarized with the car and
So
practices it over and over again.
it's a training issue more
It
than anything.
really is. So
But,
you're the only problem you really could have is relining brake pads on your elevator because your elevator
okay.
stops and brake. Sometimes you get a little oil soaked, like a brake pad in a car. If you get a little oil soaked or they slide through, once in a while you'd be like, oh, why is the car sliding? Well, your brake pads are worn. A lot of manufacturers out there, don't. There's a place like Murphy Elevator. I'm sure some of the older companies down there, they will still do it. Embry Elevators will still do it too. They'll take them out and they'll reline your brake pads and they'll put them back in. A lot of companies are like, oh, it's an old elevator. We got to get rid of the whole machine, everything. That's nonsense. There's
Why
so
have
much.
we been down for weeks before? What would have been the uh, justification for such a lag time? Any
What was wrong? Could you
justification?
tell me what happened? I mean,
Admittedly, I don't know.
well, in Babbitt sockets, which is the old style, which is something I would recommend that you replace and put on wedge sockets. You have Babbitt sockets in there now, and every year, what happens is you have to, every 2 years, they want you to re-knot your hoist ropes, which means that you have to pull the socket back out, you have to cut it, and you have to re-splice it because they wiggle back and forth in the socket. And if you have, the old style, Babbitt sockets in there, I recommend that you have them put in wedge sockets. And then you don't have to do that anymore. You have to change the cables anymore. You can just leave the cables up. The cables will literally last you, you know, 20 years without anything going wrong with them because they wrap up on a drum. And so I'm not sure what you had wrong with your elevator, but an old machine like that should never take that long to, to be down unless the people just didn't know what they were doing. Elevator operator, like you said, you're a meet and greet person. You're a person in the building. You show up.
Yeah,
You're there. You're actually like a security person. You're a guard that watches your building. It's like having a security dog there every day.
yeah,
What's he doing? He's running the elevator for you. So he's
totally
he's
agree
doing
with
like
this.
he's doing multiple jobs for you, and he's not an expense. He's actually a help for your building. Now, when I go out and test the elevator in a building like that, they could make you put in a generator to run the elevator, so
Yeah,
it takes away some systems that you would need that
yeah,
you'd have to pay for with a new system,
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. And we're grandfathered in right now.
That's right, you are, and I would never lose that
Yeah.
grandfather clause. I would keep it as long as you can.
So helpful. I feel so much more comfortable uh, talking to you about this because I think none of us that were voting to keep this thing would feel comfortable if we were supporting something that really had a future of aging out and breaking down and liability issues for the Commodore. So I feel very comfortable with this.
I work as an inspector, and I go around testing with these guys, and I'm in the cab you're talking about in your elevator is made out of real steel. I mean,
Yeah,
I worked at Portsmouth Navy Yard, and the guy went up there and he changed over one of my big freight cars. It was a huge freight car. It was a 20,000 pound freight car. And the salesman wanted to sell him everything. He's in there and he sold him a new machine, a new controller. And the only thing it really needed was new doors, the things that really wore out. And you could put the new doors on. I said, hey, leave everything else alone. He didn't. He went in there, he changed the whole cab. So he took the cab out and he put a new steel cab in. The cab was so light duty that it didn't meet the requirements. They had to take counterweight off of the counterweight because
oh,
he
wow.
lightened up the elevator so much because he took real steel, like from a 1935 car, and tried to compare it to a 2023
Yeah,
car, which is made out of
yeah,
like a tin can.
yeah.
So
So my
every
take home from all of this is that you support it clearly, keeping
absolutely.
number two, check for wedge sockets, change out to wedge sockets. And number three, make sure that our operators are well trained on this.
Yes. and tell them to
Those are
watch the step. That should be something that
watch
every
that.
line, you
Are those
know?
three are those three proper takeaways?
Yes, absolutely,
Okay.
and then also that you can't replace your car with anything out there. You know, your
Yeah,
elevator lasted for 100 years, and there was a reason for that. They built elevators 100 years ago to last 100 years because they said that's how long the buildings will last.
yeah,
Nowadays, they build elevators to last for 20 years because they say that's how long businesses last within the elevator, and they don't
okay,
last 20 years. They last closer to 10. And the reason for that is the controllers always blow apart. They're made out of cheap. It's like your phone running your elevator as opposed to what you have there now.
yeah,
You know, they put in these little tiny computers. You know, the guys don't go out there to fix them. They change them. They go out and they look at a computer. You get, you know, all these elevator guys that they're good mechanically,
right,
electrically,
right,
and they walk in, they see a computer
right.
like myself, and I'm like, even me, I'm struggling. I've been an elevator guy my whole life. I'm sitting there playing with you. I can't even, you know, mute the system and all this stuff. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So,
yeah.
you know, and I could fix any. I could really. If I was down there, the elevator would run till I die. You know what I mean? If I was down
Yeah.
there helping you out, because it wouldn't break. You know, that just the way it's designed. You know,
Well, Steve,
unfortunately.
thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Elevator companies don't appreciate me saying this because they
No,
don't like to keep the stuff. They're like,
yeah,
Stevie,
I
be
get
quiet. We want to sell them some new garbage. You know what I mean? So we can put
it.
it in every new year. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
What kills me is they're talking about a $485,000 loan or a $500,000 loan that we're going to be taking on with interest of 8%. So we're looking at $40,000 to $50,000 in just interest only over
Every 10
5.
years. Every 10
Yeah.
years, because you're
So
going to
this
throw
is
that one out in 10 years.
yeah, yeah, and that's just interest.
You know, and they do, whether, you know, I wouldn't put it out to them that they're actually a security guard for your building, but they are. They're just eyes on your building. It's always an
Yeah,
up and down. They see all the
that,
floors. They see the first
that
floor. They meet the people.
yeah,
So there's a lot to
yeah.
it. By having an attendant in your building is not a loss, in my opinion. There's so many roles that they actually play, you know, in a minor degree, you know. That's
Nice to
important.
talk to you. Really nice to talk. Well, thank you very much, Steve.
You're welcome.